Your hosts of today's event, and we thank you very much for coming here to the 7th Annual Symposium on Pediatric Device Innovation. Our theme of this year is Pediatric Clinical Trials, Forging a Better Path. We picked this topic because as a life sciences community, we know that clinical trials are very well understood in the drugs domain. Everyone thinks of clinical trials in terms of phase 1 to 4 trials, and that is very well understood among IRBs, clinical sites, and even the investor community. So for device innovators and sponsors, we sometimes run into roadblocks with the IRBs who are reviewing a protocol with the lens of a drug protocol. And to add to this complexity is the uniqueness of the pediatric market, and also the fact that the government agency that regulates medical devices does not include the word device in its title. So that we cannot fix today. That I'll leave that for the MedTech community to fix that. But we're very happy to celebrate some of the big successes that came out of the pediatric device community this past year. Specifically, we're going to hear from Lisa Becker from Abbott, whose device that she was working for a long time from St. Jude and then to Abbott got market clearance. It's the Emplatzer Piccolo occluder device that will be used for the tiniest baby as small as 2 pounds. That's a huge success for the pediatric device community, but we don't want these successes to be the one-offs and the exceptions, and hopefully we can all aspire to a day that all top 10 MedTech device companies can have a pediatric division so they can measure impact both in terms of corporate social responsibility and profits. So with that, I want to thank our sponsors who made today's event possible. They are Booz Allen Hamilton, Johnson & Johnson, Elkes Manfredi, Oblon, Archimedic, who am I missing? Fujifilm Innovation, of course, yes. And our great partners, AdvaMed, MedTech, Innovator, and BioHealth Innovation. So with that, I would like to introduce you to Janet Trunzo, Senior Advisor to President and Senior Executive Vice President for Regulatory Affairs and Technology at AdvaMed.
Good morning. It's so great to be here again. This is a third annual event where we have co-located with our annual MedTech conference, so it's really exciting to have this again. Just a little bit about what AdvaMed is. AdvaMed is the largest medical device trade association, and our mission is to advocate on a global basis the highest ethical standards and timely patient access to safe and effective medical technologies. Co-locating this event, the Pediatric Symposium, with the MedTech conference, we think is a win-win because there are a lot of synergies to be gained. There are opportunities to mingle with with other companies, small-sized companies, with more established companies. There are educational opportunities, and at the end of the day, we're all seeking the same goal, is to improve pediatric device development so that children can have access to safe and effective medical devices that they need. AdvaMed has been supporting the concept of pediatric device development ever since I've been at AdvaMed. We have a long-standing pediatric device working group chaired by Tara Federici, who many of you know. I'd like to recognize one of our co-chairs, Dr. Jackie Phillips sitting right over there. And we have some past co-chairs of that working group in the audience today, too. Dr. Susan Alpert, and there she is, and Tony Blank. So we're happy to see that because these are people that are very supportive of the concepts of pediatric device development, and they continue to be so long after they have been involved with AdvaMed. We're really excited about our MedTech conference this year because of the multiple educational panels, and this time we have nearly 50 representatives from the Food and Drug Administration here for this conference, and we ended on Wednesday afternoon with a CDRH town hall meeting that is run by our Center Director for Medical Devices, Dr. Jeff Shurn, and he has many of his executive team there with him to answer questions, and that is the highlight of our regulatory discussions. There is also our Pediatric Device Working Group also holds a meeting tomorrow morning, which you're all invited to attend. At this meeting, we are going to continue to work on the Pediatric Device Innovation Framework. This was unveiled a year ago when we had this Pediatric Device Working Group meeting. Dr. Paris from FDA presented it over the year. We've been working with him to refine it, and that is going to be the main topic of the discussion tomorrow. But today's program includes a lot of exciting line of speakers and panels that we're very excited to hear about. Of course, as Kolaleh mentioned, a focus on the difference between device and drug clinical trials, major differences there. The need for regulatory alternatives for traditional clinical trials when we're dealing with small pediatric populations. Better understanding of how this emerging technology of software as a medical device and how those products can benefit pediatric health. So we have a panel with recent regulatory developments on that. We have some real great software experts there, including AdvaMed's Zach Rothstein. And then, of course, the medical device pitch competition, which always is my favorite. Our keynote speakers, Melinda, Richter, and Vassim is here too. So I'm just so excited for this program, and I hope that you are too, and welcome. Thank you.
It's great, and it's exciting to be here again. Every year this gets better, bigger. I'm Anthony Sandler. I'm the Chief of Surgery at Children's National, and I'm also the Director of the Sheikh Zayed Institute. We've done this now for 7 years. I've been to every one, and I've enjoyed every one, and every year I enjoy it a little more. It's great to see old friends, hopefully meet some new friends, and really to interact, collaborate, and get conversations going about device development. I do really want to thank Kolaleh and her team for putting this together. They do an amazing job. She didn't give me any speaking points. This is for real from my heart. Kolaleh, thank you very much, and I'd really like to give you some applause for your work. If I may get the day started, I'd like to introduce David Wessel. Dr. Wessel is the Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer and Icaria Distinguished Professor of Critical Care Medicine at Children's National. He's also a Professor of Anesthesiology, Critical Care Medicine, and Pediatrics at George Washington University. He's internationally known for his pioneering work in caring for infants with heart disease. He has over 100 publications. He's done a lot of work with pulmonary hypertension and congenital heart disease and really made a major impact in the field. He's the principal investigator and a member of the steering committee for the Collaborative Pediatric Clinical Care Research Network that's sponsored by NIH. David is not only my boss, so I'm going to be particularly kind, but more than that, he has an incredible pedigree in medicine, where he trained at Oxford, Yale, and Harvard. Before coming to Children's in 2007, he was the professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School and a senior associate in cardiology and anesthesia at Boston Children's Hospital. He's board certified in anesthesiology, pediatrics, pediatric cardiology, and pediatric critical care medicine, I suppose to name but a few. But it's a real pleasure having David here today, who's really going to set up the competition and why the neonatal care is so important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate the introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to be here and to welcome you all on behalf of Children's National. This talk is meant to set the stage for the presentations and the competitions that are coming in just a few minutes. Kolaleh asked me to try to provide some context why the newborn would be an important topic to focus on for this particular year. I really also want to mention that part of this presentation is inspired by some of the leaders in our institution. Robin Steinhorn in particular, who's one of our judges this morning, is our Senior Vice President for Hospital-Based Specialties. She's a neonatologist, has been with us in Washington now for 4 years, and has really been one of the inspirations and drivers for our rankings and things like U.S. News & World Report, where for the 3rd year in a row we've been ranked #1 in the country. And I also want to mention Charlie Barul. Charles is the chief of cardiology at our institution and really has worked collaboratively with the Sheikh Zayed Institute to advance the technology for children with heart disease. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how that advancement can be applied to the bedside. So I bring you greetings from Washington, D.C., and really do enjoy living in Washington. I have to say it's been a wonderful place. I spent 25 years in Boston, but my family and my professional career has really benefited, especially from being in Washington, D.C. for the past decade. And Children's National has been a great place for collaboration between the basic sciences, the clinical sciences, and the clinical care. And under the terrific leadership of our president and CEO, Dr. Kurt Newman, we've really been able, I think, to provide partnerships that advance the care of children. We have some unique opportunities living in Washington, D.C. Our hospital is located just a mile north of the nation's capital, and we have a significant presence on Capitol Hill to advance policies that promote the health and well-being of children in our society. But we're also an academic and research institution, and we enjoy the relationship with the National Institutes of Health. We share a lot of faculty. Our fellows go back and forth. There are a number of research opportunities that really help set the stage at Children's National for doing cutting-edge research. But we're especially interested in our relationship with the Food and Drug Administration, where again we have both fellows who work at the FDA and work at Children's National. They do clinical care, they do research, and provide us with a lot of inspiration for innovation. And that has been a great working relationship over the past few years. But my talk this morning is really meant to set the stage for why we wanted to set the theme in the competition on the newborn, because there are some special challenges there. Let me give you a little bit of context for the newborn population, at least in the United States. So we know that in the United States, a baby is born every 8 seconds, but 1 in 8 of them arrive too early. They're premature. 1 in 26 has a serious birth defect, and 1 in 12 is dangerously low in their birth weight. So prematurity and small size are going to be a real challenge for us if we try to develop any technology that we can apply to improving the care of these very young and vulnerable patients. So 6% of the 4 million births each year in the United States require admission to the NICU. However, if you break those numbers down, you realize that we could never do the kinds of studies that are necessary in adults to get drug approval, for example. It's very common for important adult-oriented drug trials to have 10, 20, or 30,000 patients enrolled. That will never happen in neonatal studies. So that's a real limitation on what we can accomplish in the conventional ways that have guided our work with adult populations. We have a lot of prematurity in the United States. Unfortunately, it's among the very worst of the developed nations, and I'm sorry to say that last year that number ticked up a little bit. So there was a little bit of rise in this past year in premature births in the United States after making some progress in prior years. It does have a big impact on our economy, approaching now $30 billion each year. In the last 15 years, we've seemed to have reached a little bit of a plateau in terms of the advancement of care and the progress that's been made, and I think it challenges us to develop devices that are particularly suited for the newborns, and I would argue the premature newborn in particular. And just as a reminder, we use a lot of devices and drugs that are not specifically labeled for use in newborns in particular, and premature newborns especially. So there's a lot of untested therapies that are applied in our best efforts to the newborn, but still with insufficient data to provide an evidence-based approach to medicine in many circumstances. So if I go out and ask a number of neonatologists to tell me what has really marked the changes in the past 3 or 4 decades in neonatology, you get a list that looks something like this. The introduction of surfactant and the ability to have sophisticated methods of mechanical ventilation have been a very important advancement in the field. Advancement in nutrition and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation have really marked successes in our field. The introduction of inhaled nitric oxide and more recently therapeutic hypothermia. So these are some of the things that have marked advances in this field, but notice that many of them are linked to devices, not just drugs. Even nitric oxide, for example, is closely tied to a technology that can deliver the drug safely. ECMO is really, in many respects, all about technology. The same for therapeutic hypothermia. So development of devices can really have an impact on improving the care of the newborn. But it's hard to develop drugs and devices for children, especially for the premature infant. As you know, and we've discussed many times at this annual symposium, the small markets, the rare diseases, and the high risk and liabilities that companies would have to undertake in order to advance the care are a real limitation to advance even technology, not just drug therapies. There are not very many good, appropriate animal models. There's difficulty with study design and outcome measures. We can't always come to an agreement between what families think is an important outcome variable, what physicians and researchers think, and what regulators or the FDA think are really important, measurable, interpretable outcome measures for children in various studies that need to be designed to advance the care. It's also hard to establish safety and the drug-drug interactions in this patient population. And frankly, there's just some physical limitations in that small is hard when you're developing new devices. If we want to define value in a newborn intensive care unit, we can use various surveys. I mentioned US News and World Report, but there are other measures of value that our neonatology colleagues will tell us are really, really important. Beginning with comparative mortality, but you know it's hard in comparative mortality to get a benchmark that you can really use. It's not really used in the US News and World Report, nor is the long-term outcome, the physical and the neurodevelopmental disabilities of our patients are not part of a typical survey. The quality of life from the parent's perspective and the clinician's perspective, that's a really important variable, and you may not get that information for 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years after the child is born and has a disability. And of course, we have the constant challenge of measuring the cost to achieve the highest quality outcomes, and that's got to be part of our value equation. So what makes a top NICU? Well, we believe it's expertise, experience, attention to detail, putting the right teams together, including teams that involve the entire interdisciplinary approach to patient care and the parent. And finally, the focus on innovation is going to be critical to advancing this field in the next decade. I want to show you just a couple of slides of some of the work that our teams are doing that are particularly applicable to the newborn. Our cardiology group is working with the Sheikh Zayed Institute for Surgical Innovation and really coming up with some great inventions, devices, and innovations that are applicable to the newborn. There are several listed here, but I just want to talk a little bit about minimally invasive pacemakers. You are maybe familiar with the typical rather large pacemaker box, the generator for adults. It has gotten quite a bit smaller. There are some of those that can be put into children. It's very hard to find devices that can be put into very small children, newborns, and of course, even harder for premature newborns. One can do it by opening the chest, doing a sternotomy, and putting the wires on the pericardium, the outside of the heart, and then trying to fit a box in the chest. But again, it's been really challenging. But Dr. Barul and the engineers at Sheikh Zayed Institute and other clinicians have been able to partner with industry. And I think this represents really many of the themes of this meeting, where industry and clinician investigators and engineers come together, and we've been able to develop a generator. So this is a box that's now down to a cylinder generator. The battery's in there. It generates the electrical pacemaker capacity. The wire and the leads have been modified. The group at Children's National has developed an adapter that takes this generator and screws it into the lead and the leadlet here. And the aim is actually to place this on the outside of the heart, inside the pericardium, but on the outside of the heart, to provide pacemaking capacity for children who need pacemakers when they're first born, including premature newborns. And so what Dr. Barul has been able to do is develop not only that technology to match the generator from industry to devices that can go into the child, but to be able to place them percutaneously through the chest wall, developing a port. So through this port, he can pass a thoracoscope and see the pericardium, and then put a wire into the pericardium, and then follow with this pacemaker lead and attach it directly to the pericardium to pace the heart in the pericardial space, and then tunnel the generator underneath the skin. And as you saw, it's a very, very small generator and battery supply. And here's just an example, a photograph of the port that our team has developed, where you have a thoracoscope on the left-hand side here. There's the pacemaker device actually being inserted through the port. And on the right-hand side, you see this is pericardial space. And if you look just here, the pacemaker goes through the pericardium and then lands on the epicardial surface of the heart, and we can pace those. Now, these are animal models that Charlie's developed. They've been quite successful, and we're hoping someday to be able to introduce them into human care, especially in our newborn ICU. So that's just a little bit of our perspective on the newborn and why we would focus a conference like this on the newborn, the challenges of the newborn, but also the promise and hope of the future if we can apply technology to solving some of the problems of the newborn. Because our objective, and I showed you some slides of preemie, and this is a preemie who's not so preemie. This is her grown-up version of one of those preemies that Dr. Steinhorn kindly gave me these slides through a patient that she's followed. And what we really want to emphasize here in this meeting is that it isn't just about surviving, it's about having our children survive and thrive. And that's what we'll be looking for this device competition. I really look forward to hearing the presentation. So thank you all very much for coming.
So, thank you so much, Dr. Wessel. And the competition is funded by our FDA grant that helped us establish the National Capital Consortium for Pediatric Device Innovation. And we're very pleased to have partnered with MedTech Innovator, the industry leader in sourcing, scouting talent around the world and helping us run this competition. With that, I would like to introduce my great friend and colleague, Paul Grand. Please. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Here again, very excited. We love working in pediatric innovation. We've been partnered now with the NCC PDI for the past year, which has been terrific. Love being part of that. MedTech Innovator, for those of you who don't know MedTech Innovator, I'll give you a very brief introduction on who we are and what we do and what we're doing here in pediatrics. So what you see here up on the slide is the image of the finals from MedTech Innovator's competition here at the AdvaMed conference, the MedTech conference last year.